A team can't win a championship without a championship caliber coach. There are some key areas Robert Saleh needs to improve in, and we'll talk about what they are today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, February 5th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GanggreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, of course, last week the Jets were rocked by an explosive article by The Athletic that detailed some of the things that were going on behind the scenes. The article was particularly critical of Robert Saleh, and I think if we're going to be honest, Robert Saleh has not been a very good coach his first 3 years with the Jets. And you need a great coach to win a championship. The Jets want to get to the Super Bowl this coming year or next year. And if you look at the teams that are playing in the Super Bowl this coming Sunday, the Kansas City Chiefs and San Francisco 49ers, there are lots of reasons they're there. But perhaps at the top of the list is they have two of the best head coaches in the NFL. You want to win a championship, very difficult to do it without a championship caliber coach. And right now, Robert Saleh is not a championship caliber coach. So what does he need to do to get there? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I think by any standard, Robert Saleh has been a subpar head coach. 3 years with the Jets, an 18-33 record, no winning seasons, never won more than 7 games, never made the playoffs, never even entered week 18 with a chance to make the playoffs. Not what you want. And I think a lot of it goes back to Saleh's failures. It's not all his fault. I mean, the roster has been deficient in some areas, but there are just some areas you see where Saleh has underperformed. And I think at the top of the list, and this is something that absolutely needs to change, this organization needs to stop making excuses. This organization needs to stop feeling sorry for itself. Now, if you read that article in The Athletic, there was lots of talk about Saleh saying, well, how do you expect me to win without Aaron Rodgers? There was talk about Saleh actually searching up the records of great head coaches, searching up Sean McVay's record, Bill Belichick's record, Andy Reid's record when they play with a backup quarterback and, kind of selling the narrative, well, their records aren't very good with their backup quarterbacks. How should I win? Well, of course, that's not a valid comparison because these other coaches have great records when they have a starting quarterback. Robert Saleh's record with his starting quarterbacks is not very good. Now, I know you could say, well, how do we know those stories are true from The Athletic? Well, I have no reason to doubt them, but I'll say this. I felt watching the team this year that the Jets were full of excuses. And I felt at various points in the season, like the Jets kind of just felt like bad for themselves. I mean, there were points, especially late in the year, where they fell behind early in the game, and it was like the game was over. It was like the Jets kind of felt like, oh, we don't have our quarterback. We can't win. I felt that way against Miami when they got blown out 30-0 in a game where they were still technically alive for the playoffs, in a game where if they had won it, they kept selling the idea Aaron Rodgers is coming back next week. If we just win this game, we'll get Aaron Rodgers back. Well, they came out and showed very little fight in that game. I mean, the Thursday night game against Cleveland, week 17, they did not do a great job then. I mean, they really were not competitive for most of that game. It's easy to point to Rodgers going down and say that the season was over from that point. But I think we all, if you remember the flow of the season, this season was very much not over when Rodgers got injured. Because first of all, they won the game against Buffalo, a team that was very good, a team that ended up getting the 2 seed in the AFC. They beat the Bills the night Aaron Rodgers got hurt. Second, this team started 4-3. Again, very easy to forget. This team, through 7 games, was in great position to potentially make a run. I don't think anybody thought they'd go to the Super Bowl, but this team was not out of the race by any stretch of the imagination 4 plays into the season. It's very easy to look back and have this revisionist history that the Jets were completely finished, that the season was over from that point. It was not over. This team was showing fight. The defense was playing well. They were getting some fortunate bounces, but it just felt like watching the team from a distance. You can say like those again, you can say the Athletic article maybe was inaccurate with some of the details. I don't know what basis you make that statement on, but just from watching the team, you could tell that there was something wrong there. You could tell that this team almost was like willing to make excuses, and it came from the very top. If you remember Christmas Eve, right before the game against the Commanders, the article came out from Woody Johnson, which primarily informed us that Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh were returning for 2024. But Johnson was making excuses. Johnson was saying, well, this is a Super Bowl team, but you can't expect the team to do better than this without Aaron Rodgers. So when it comes from the very top, it's difficult. This was the year of the backup quarterback in the NFL. And I don't think anybody thought the Jets were a Super Bowl team after Aaron Rodgers went down. And that doesn't mean you give up on the season. It doesn't mean it's okay to play the way the Jets played, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And this offense was one of the worst offenses in recent memory. There's this statistic, EPA, it's called expected points added. And it's viewed as like this advanced statistic. It's viewed as like this like very difficult, opaque thing to understand. It's actually much simpler than that. It's very, very basic. We have a lot of data in the history of the NFL. It goes back decades. So we have a pretty good sense. You can look through the numbers. How likely is it for a team to score if they have 1st and 10 on their own 40? You can figure out how many points you would typically score in that situation. So at the end of the play, let's say you gain 7 yards. You compare how many points a team would typically score 1st and 10 from the 40 versus 2nd and 3 from the 47 on drives that involve plays like this. And at the end of the play, you look and you essentially subtract one from the other. You say, okay, in our new situation, 1st and 10 from the 40, we'd expect to score, 3 points on a drive. 2nd and 3 from the 47, we'd expect to score 4 points. Now, I'm just making these numbers up. These aren't the actual numbers. So if it's 4 versus 3, if you start the play expecting 3 points and end the play expecting 4 points, you've added 1 point per play. So that's essentially what EPA is. It's not like this very difficult number to understand. The Jets eat by EPA, and they have data that goes back to like the year 2000. So the data that goes back 24 years. The Jets had one of the worst offenses on a play-to-play basis since they've been tracking this. So this wasn't just like a bad offense. This wasn't just one of the worst offenses in the NFL. This is one of the worst offenses in the NFL on a play-to-play basis the last 2.5 decades. Did Robert Saleh hold people accountable? Did Robert Saleh hold his coaching staff accountable? No. They're making excuses. And we know the biggest reason Nathaniel Hackett's coming back, but question was asked to Robert Saleh during the season. You've changed so much. You've benched guys, you've benched quarterbacks. Why haven't you changed the play caller? And Saleh went out and made excuses for Nathaniel Hackett. And Saleh at one point late in the season said that the offense has been so much better since the Atlanta game. Well, it really wasn't that much better. The offense got no results. And, the Athletic article mentioned that, the Jets may create a quote unquote more collaborative play calling process, whatever that means. Look, we know Rodgers is going to run the offense when he returns, but it feels like there are very few consequences for Nathaniel Hackett because we have the built-in excuse. And what I say is that there's a difference between the offense, maybe performing at a lower level without Aaron Rodgers, and the offense performing at maybe the lowest level of any offense since 2000 without Aaron Rodgers. There's a difference between the offense not being good and the offense being one of the worst of the last 24 years. Yet you see very little done on the coaching side for that. The entire coaching staff came back. They didn't even change the offensive line coach. You watched the offensive line struggle all season long. Guys did not understand their assignments. And Aaron Rodgers has no ties to the offensive line coach. So you want to blame Rodgers for Hackett coming back. There's probably something to that. I doubt Rodgers had anything to do with the offensive line coach coming back. But the Jets making excuses for their coaches. The excuses need to end. And it's not going to happen when we're talking about the construction of the coaching staff. But heading into next season, a championship team does not make excuses. A championship team figures out how to work around problems. And even when they're difficult, I know it's very trite to say next man up, and it doesn't always work out that way. But that has to be your attitude. You can't sit around feeling bad for yourself when things go wrong. You have to figure out ways to find solutions. You can't sit around and just say, oh, well, we're doomed. And I feel like there were too many times this past season where Saleh said that, or at least he felt like he said that. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to turn our attention to the biggest problem on the team. And it's the offensive side of the ball. And obviously there are personnel issues. Obviously there are coaching issues. But I think that some of the issues are rooted in Saleh's overall philosophy. And I think Salah's overall philosophy is not one conducive to winning games in the modern NFL. And that's something that's going to need to evolve if the Jets are to achieve their goals in 2024. I'll go into more detail on that as we continue this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by DoorDash. It's Monday, first day back at the office for a lot of people, first day back at work. You get home tonight, you just want to relax. Do you really want to cook a meal? That's where DoorDash comes in. DoorDash will connect you with so many great restaurants in the New York area or wherever you live. And all you have to do is open the app, a couple taps, figure out what you want, and a Dasher will bring the meal directly to you. You're in the mood for sushi? Well, you should try out Blue Ribbon Sushi in Soho. They have an impressive selection of pristine sushi, of course, made from seafood that's flown in daily, and platters come in a range of sizes to serve the whole family. But don't pass over their extensive menu of appetizers, where there are plenty of gems to be found. It's a great place, and if you're not into sushi, you can get anything you want on DoorDash. Everything from great restaurants in your neighborhood to chain restaurants that have familiar favorites. And right now you can get up to 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. That's when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change, terms apply. Again, that's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. When you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23, it's one word with no space, LOCKED, number 2, number 3. Subject to change, terms apply. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. A big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. You should also know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Today on Locked On Jets, we're talking about things that Robert Saleh needs to improve heading into 2024. Difficult season for the Jets in 2023. They were faced with adversity and did not handle it well. I think that Robert Saleh was in the excuse business this past season. But I think he was also in the business of an outdated philosophy. I think that Saleh's overall viewpoint can best be summed up by something he told Tony Dungy before the Jets played the Raiders on Sunday Night Football in November. He called the game a race to 20 points. And I get the feeling, and sometimes this happens with defensive coaches, and I think sometimes people become very down on defensive coaches, and they essentially think that every defensive coach is like this when they're not. But Saleh's mindset overall seems to be, let the offense stay out of the way, let my defense win a game. Just don't make mistakes, punt the ball, it's fine. The defense will make the plays that win the game. And this is an outdated philosophy. In fact, I'm not sure this was ever a great philosophy in the NFL. It's for a simple reason. If you play close games, something could go wrong. The best team in the NFL can lose to the worst team in the NFL if the game is tight with 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. It has nothing to do with skill. There could be a bounce that goes against you. It could be a bad call that goes against you. You have to play to win games by an overwhelming margin. Jets did not do that much this year. Jets only had 2 wins by multiple scores: the game against Houston and the final game against New England. When you play tight games, again, sometimes things don't bounce your way. And the only way to win blowouts is to have an offense that puts points on the board. Now, the Jets obviously were personnel challenged this year, especially without Rodgers. But it's one thing to say, we don't have great personnel. It's another to say, we're just focused on protecting the football. We're focused on not making mistakes. That quote was very telling to me. But you could go beyond that. We could talk about how the Jets quarterbacks, according to Next Gen Stats, threw short of the stick at a higher rate than practically any other quarterback. In fact, Zach Wilson was 8th from the bottom, and one of the 7 quarterbacks who threw shorter to the sticks than Zach Wilson was Trevor Siemian. Now, the caveat is obviously the Jets had a bad offensive line this year, so the ball maybe had to get out a little bit quicker. But how do you explain the all of the run pass calls. The Jets having sequence first down run, second down run, third down pass, a rate higher than any other team in the NFL. It speaks to a philosophy, again, that just doesn't work in today's NFL if it ever did. And this is something that's got to change. And fortunately, with Aaron Rodgers back, maybe Saleh will have a quarterback that he trusts a little bit more to make plays. But what the Jets were doing this past season just was not working. And you can see it through the record because they didn't win enough games. They only won 7 games. And, you can look at some of the defenses they played. There's this statistic that the former football website Football Outsiders came up with. It was called DVOA. Now, this one's, I told you the last segment, EPA, expected points added, is not as difficult of a concept as it's made out to be. DVOA is a little bit trickier, but it tries to like contextualize plays. If it's like a completion for 8 yards on 3rd and 10, it's really a failure for the offense, even though it looks good using traditional stats. So it tries to contextualize things like that. And I looked at the defenses the Jets played that were below average in DVOA this past season. And they include the Giants, where the Jets were about to lose a game where the other team did not complete a pass in the second half. That's how well the offense played against the Giants defense. Miami, two absolute no-shows against the Miami Dolphins, a below-average defense. The Atlanta Falcons, really lousy defense. Jets did nothing in that game. The Chargers, a game where Jets were actually playing pretty well heading into the Chargers game. Chargers, a defense that was getting shredded on a regular basis. Jets did nothing, got blown out 27-6. The Philadelphia Eagles, Jets won that game, but they won that game because of their defense. The offense did nothing, and if the defense had not made the plays, storyline number one would have been how little they did against the offense. The Denver Broncos. Now, I know you could say the Jets scored 31 points in that game, which technically was true, but you have to remember, first of all, they scored a defensive touchdown in that one. They also had the defense put up a safety. So 9 points of the 31 came from the defense. There was also a situation early in the game where the Broncos muffed a punt and the Jets got the ball in field goal range and settled for a field goal. There were 2 other plays in the second half, or 2 other series in the second half where the Jets started at midfield and settled for field goals. So this takes a lot of the wind out of the sails, out of the idea that the Jets played well against Denver. But when the Jets scored their one offensive touchdown in Denver, it was on a Breece Hall 72-yard touchdown run. So I look at this and I think like Saleh's entire philosophy was just wait for Breece Hall to break a big run, because that's what you saw week after week after week. And as great as Breece is, he's not going to break a 72-yard run every week. But Saleh views that almost as like, that's like our opportunity to make a big play. It's safe because you're not going to throw an interception. The problem, though, is that you can't score a lot of points playing that way. The other bad defense the Jets faced was Washington, so they actually had a pretty good game on offense in that one. But that Denver game, it sticks out to me because even though the Jets technically scored 31 points, the offense did not do the job. In fact, the conservative play calling, in my view, was the only reason that the Broncos still had a shot in the fourth quarter of that game. The Jets had many opportunities to put that game away, but their conservative play calling kept the Broncos in that game. That game was begging to be lost by the Jets because of the way they were approaching it, and it was not lost. However, the offense in general just did not do the job. And you could say, well, it's part of the overall team philosophy. Well, the philosophy didn't work. I mean, just think about it. Jets went 7-10 this year. Having a bad offense is not a strategy. You could say there are certain teams that, like this year, Patrick Mahomes is throwing the ball shorter than he's thrown it in the past, but Kansas City's still putting up points. The philosophy just simply doesn't work. It's one thing to say we want to be safe, but when playing it safe leads to such unproductive offensive results, how does it work? When you're losing games, how does it work? The Jets need to be more aggressive. Sometimes you have to take risks to score, and Robert Saleh has not shown a willingness to do this. Now, the silver lining might be, the light at the end of the tunnel might be, with Aaron Rodgers back, maybe he'll trust his offense a little bit more. Maybe with a quarterback who's a veteran, a quarterback who's going to the Hall of Fame, he'll say, you know what, I can put the ball in his hands. So perhaps that's a silver lining. But no matter what happens, the Jets cannot play offense like this. The Jets cannot play football like this and think we're just going to win a bunch of games 13-10, because as we saw, that's not a sustainable formula in this league. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to how Saleh is not exactly at the cutting edge when it comes to in-game strategy. When you get to the playoffs, when you get to big games, sometimes the incremental advantages or disadvantages your coaches provide make a big difference. Saleh's not doing the job for the Jets, and we'll go into more detail on that as we continue on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel, and a happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Super Bowl Sunday is a great day. Sometimes you just want to sit on your couch. You might grab your favorite football snacks. You might play some super bets. Sometimes you're off to a party, but before you go, you may want to put some money down on the game. Super Bowl's Sunday is a great day, no matter how you spend it. And you should know that FanDuel has many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58 now, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. With two offenses like this, I think we can expect the scoreboard to light up. And you should know that FanDuel will provide new customers with $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit fanduel.com/lockedon to sign up. Again, that's fanduel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. We're talking about areas Robert Saleh needs to improve if the Jets are going to have success going forward, and if Saleh is going to have a successful head coaching career. Because right now, I don't think you can say Robert Saleh is a very good head coach. And Saleh was front and center last week with an article published by The Athletic. It talked about some of his shortcomings this past season. Well, one area the article really did not discuss is in-game strategy. And I think that it's very difficult to quantify something like this, but there are a couple of numbers that really stick out to me. And what they suggest is that Saleh is not at the cutting edge, and he's not focusing on making sure his coaches are on the cutting edge. Now, former football website Football Outsiders used to have this metric, aggressiveness index, and a site FTN Fantasy took it over. And what aggressiveness index suggests is which coaches are aggressive on going for it on fourth downs and which ones are not. And they don't really use analytics. They don't really judge. They don't say coaches should go for it here. What they're saying is they're just comparing every coach in the NFL, how frequently they go for it on fourth down. Now, one thing you'll notice if you study the numbers, if you look at the data, teams are not nearly aggressive enough going for it on fourth down as they should be. NFL conventional wisdom is that you punt the ball in situations where the numbers suggest you really should go for it. So generally speaking, the coaches who are more aggressive going for it on fourth down are the guys who are running their team better, who are maximizing their potential. Because you have to remember, if you go for it on a fourth down, it gives you an extra down. Normally you have 3. Extra down, you're increasing your chances of picking up the first down by like 33%. Now that's an oversimplification, but you get the idea. One extra play, when you're going from 3 to 4 opportunities to get the first down, that's a big deal. And sometimes teams underutilize this. And I'm not trying to like make a referendum on Dan Campbell right now, because it's not necessarily true that you should go for it in every situation, but the numbers suggest that teams are not nearly aggressive enough in going for it, that there are situations where it would benefit them to going for it, and they don't do it enough. Well, last year in aggressiveness index, Saleh finished 32nd in the league. This year, he improved a little bit. FTN Fantasy, again, this website, rated him 21st most aggressive in going for it on fourth downs. And again, I'm not saying that you go for it on every fourth down, but I'm saying that generally speaking, because the status quo in the NFL is to punt the ball or kick a field goal in situations where aggressiveness would be better, coaches who are more aggressive are generally running their game better. I'll give you another stat. I'll give you another metric. The Jets' play action rate on passing downs was under 20% this season. Now, the teams running play action most frequently, they get into like the 30s on about 30% of their passing plays are play action. But here's the thing. The Jets should be at the top of the league. And the reason for that is play action simplifies things. And when you have a less talented team, play action can make a difference. The numbers all show, and the numbers go back years. They show you play action passing is more efficient than regular drop back passing. Now, if you have Patrick Mahomes, if you have Joe Burrow, these are quarterbacks who can dissect the defense. These are quarterbacks with, talent at the receiver position. The guys they know that can win. I'm talking Travis Kelce. I'm talking Jamar Chase. I'm talking T. Higgins. Jets only have one quality receiver in Garrett Wilson. They also were playing with shaky quarterbacks this season. Zach Wilson was probably the best of them, and Zach Wilson's not a great quarterback. So play action passing is something the Jets should lean into more. First of all, it slows down the pass rush because every defender in the front 7 has both a run assignment and a pass assignment on a given play. And when they see the run, they have to play their run assignment. And typically the run assignment means that they need to show a little bit more discipline. So if you shoot up the field trying to sack the quarterback, you may run yourself out of a hole, which opens up a big lane for the running back to cut through. So play action passing slows down the pass rush. It also moves defenders out of place because, again, linebackers are moving downhill to stop the run, which opens up the middle of the field, which opens up big passing windows in the middle of the field. It makes the reads simpler. So for a quarterback like Zach Wilson, it would be a big benefit. And for receivers who, struggle to separate everybody other than Garrett Wilson, it makes their life much easier. So, it's one thing if you have a great quarterback. If Rodgers is around next year, then maybe you don't focus as much on play action passing. But they really should have done that more this past season. But this is just another example of like the Jets not focusing on best practices. It's another example of the Jets not focusing on being on the cutting edge. This isn't really a thing that's so far out there. I mean, some of these like advanced stats, sometimes I can understand why somebody might say, you know what, I don't really believe that. I understand why people don't trust the numbers sometimes, but this is pretty basic stuff. I mean, there's a pretty good reason that play action passing is more efficient than regular drop back passing. Yet the Jets did not lean into it this past season. And I think it's emblematic of a team that's not interested in finding the little advantages. And the little advantages make a big difference. This is a league where around half the games are decided by one score or less. A coach who is focused on giving his team a little bit of an extra edge, a coach that's focused on figuring out how to give his team an advantage makes a big difference. And if we want the Jets to go to the Super Bowl next year, it's going to be a tough road. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. It can be very difficult for the Jets to get there, but you're going to be going up against the best teams in the NFL. And it's no accident Andy Reid and Kyle Shanahan are playing each other in the Super Bowl for the second time in 5 years. These are great coaches. These are guys who find the advantages for their teams. Robert Saleh, I don't know what advantage he's bringing to the table right now, and that's got to change. And in-game management, I think, is one area where that could definitely change. It could stand to benefit the Jets. The Jets could definitely get a little bit more from their coach in this area. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, your team every day is our motto. You should also know that Locked On has launched the first ever national 24/7 sports streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national 24/7 sports streaming channel. And while you're subscribing to that, subscribe to Locked On Jets as well as if you're listening on a podcast source, or if you're watching on YouTube, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the show. Hope you have a great Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.